On Monday, the UN Human Rights Council released a report on last summer's conflict in Gaza, prepared by Judge Mary McCowan Davis. The report attributes responsibility for the war to Israel's occupation of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Of course, Israel withdrew from the Gaza Strip 10 years ago. My next guest, David Bedein, who's live in Jerusalem. He's the director of the Center for Near East Policy Research. He's made 3 films in the last 2 years that explain the human rights violations being perpetrated by Hamas and the Palestinian Authority. David, it's great to see you again. Now, you've done great work exposing UNRWA, the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestinians in the Middle East. And before we get to your latest film, entitled The Children's Army of Hamas, let me start by asking you about the UN Human Rights Council report. How do you regard the report's conclusion?
The UN Human Rights Report was a pornographic moment in the history of the United Nations. How can the United Nations describe 30,600 attacks on the entire civilian population of Israel as a human rights violation by Israel? It is just ridiculous and not bearing any connection to reality.
Mm-hmm. There seems to be a tremendous amount of sympathy for Hamas and no sympathy for Israel. I mean, the report accuses Israeli defense forces of serious violations of international humanitarian law, international human rights law. And, you know, I want to get to, you've submitted a policy report to the UN in advance of this, of the UN Human Rights Council releasing its report. What did you say in your report?
Our report shows that it's on our website, IsraelBehindTheNews.com, and there's also ways through that website to contact us. But we show, through facts, through interviews, through films, through our own interaction with Palestinians in Gaza, how Hamas took over all civilian areas of Gaza, including the schools of the United Nations Relief and Work Agency. Mm-hmm. We showed how they used that as their base. In the book that we put out in May 2014, Roadblock to Peace, how the UN perpetuates the Arab-Israeli conflict, we show very clearly that the schools had been taken over, not only taken over by Hamas in terms of its political wing, but the military wing in all the schools, to motivate the children to be involved in the conflict, with orders to the kids to go and liberate all of Palestine and to eliminate Israel, which last time I checked was a bona fide member of the United Nations. So what you have here is a situation of the people in Gaza, motivated by a terrorist organization who took over, by the way, in what people call a democratic election in Gaza, and in 2006, and they've been ruling there ever since. And they took over also all of the UNRWA facilities. This is very important. The UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Work Agency, supposed to be a humanitarian agency directing funds for health, education, and welfare. Instead, what's happened is the funds go through Hamas, a terrorist organization, so that funds that are meant for food and medical equipment and regular schools are instead sent into a military framework, which is in all the schools, formal military preparation classes. And our latest film shows that not only are they being prepared for psychologically for the war, but actually the children are being armed from age 11.
Is this written, David, let me ask, is this written in the curriculum? You know, how is it that UNRWA is actually teaching them to wage jihad against Israel?
That's the formal part of the curriculum. Our agency, I personally met with the Palestinian Minister of Education back in 2000 when the first new books came in, and I met with successive ministers, and they have a joint curriculum between the Palestinian Authority, Hamas, and UNRWA. And there's nothing, this does not leave anything to chance. It's very clear that the values that are advocated here are jihad, shahidism, in other words, the responsibility to commit suicide while killing Jews, the responsibility to liberate all of Palestine, the responsibility to conduct a holy war, the responsibility to demonize and reject any recognition of Israel. These are all the values that are taught. And the concept is not only a nostalgic idea of right of return, but right of return through what they call the armed struggle. And every aspect of life in these UNRWA facilities, which have been around since 1949, instead of the Arabs resettling the Arabs who were refugees from 48, they have continued this for 4 generations, keeping them in refugee facilities, promising them the right of return by force of arms as the only alternative.
David, you've done 3 films on this already. They've done very, very well. UNRWA is an organization that continues to get $1.2 billion from 30-plus countries on an annual basis. Why does the UN not only reject your policy, but not even acknowledge what you're exposing?
There's a combination of factors going on. First of all, the United Nations gives no money to UNRWA, except for their public relations. It's the donor countries, primarily the EU and the United States, that give the brunt of the funds. They want to give the image to the world, the EU and the US, that they're dealing with humanitarian issues. They keep saying, the US and the EU, this is an alternative to Hamas, even after the Hamas takeover of the facilities of UNRWA through the union elections that took place. And basically, they're all covering a certain part of their anatomy. They don't want to admit that there's a problem. However, a week ago, just a week ago today, there was an admission by the head of UNRWA that we were correct in what we put out a year ago, that UNRWA's facilities had been taken over by Hamas, and that missiles had been put into the schools, and missiles were handed over back to Hamas. All this was admitted last week by the head of UNRWA. But the spokesperson of UNRWA continues to say that we're lying, that we have no basis in reality, and he tries to say that the UNRWA facilities that we facilitate are not run by UNRWA. Well, again, it's easy to manipulate it because I can tell you that the children of UNRWA go through, we've been following this for a while, go through a certain training and filming so that if the kids die, the pictures of the kids are shown all over the world. Little Mustafa, little Muhammad, he wanted to grow up to be a big boy, but he didn't get there because of the terrible Israelis. And this is the imagery is what wins here. They're the little children, and who could possibly, in the West, who could possibly imagine that a culture of war, of pushing children into war, into the front lines, into death, that this would be something that would be acknowledged by United Nations agency at this time when the United Nations theme of this United Nations agency is peace begins here. Instead, war begins here.
You know, David, it's easy to take our eyes off of what's going on in Israel and Gaza, this conflict that seems to never end, while everything is going on with ISIS in Iraq and in Syria. But I'm so glad that you came on and you brought this to our attention because it's something that I think more people should be following. Thank you.
Well, we've established a lecture bureau to send people around the world, also Palestinians, believe it or not, working with us also, who feel that they have been manipulated by UNRWA over the years to believe that they have to live in putrid conditions under false pretenses. I'm first and foremost a social work professional, and this is not acceptable. And the Palestinians we work with also don't accept this, and they're asking the donor nations to look again about whether money should just be thrown at an agency that has been corrupted by terrorism.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you, David.
My pleasure.